Jeanine Cummins is the acclaimed author of a heartbreaking memoir and 4 novels, including the #1 New York Times mega bestseller, American Dirt, which I'm sure many of you have read. Clap your hands if you've read American Dirt. It's a fantastic story, and yet the book somehow got caught up in a crazy, unjust, ginned-up controversy, and based on those adjectives, you might infer what side I'm on, and you'd be correct, but I'm not going to stay up on a soapbox here. Jeanine's here to present her new novel, Speak to Me of Home, which just came out this week. Our friend and best-selling author Sarah McCoy calls it a masterful love letter to our shared homeland of Puerto Rico, the global diaspora, and every American. Once again, Cummins surveys the depths of the immigrant experience and compassionately examines the push and pull between our individual identity and our ancestral ties. Through 3 generations of Boricua women, the novel powerfully demonstrates that the greatest inheritance that we can pass on is a courageous heart willing to adapt. Speak to Me of Home is an epic must-read. I think you're all going to love it. And leading the conversation today will be Donna Hemans, who's the author of 3 novels, including The House of Plain Truth, which she'll be signing after this program, so please go get a copy of that as well. She serves on the Penn Faulkner Foundation board and is also the owner of the DC Writers Room, a co-working studio for writers based in Washington, D.C. So let's give a warm Gaithersburg welcome to Donna Hemans and our hometown hero, Jeanine Cummins.
Wow, I thought I would get through the introduction without crying, so thank you, Mayor Judd.
So it's a pleasure to be here with you and soaking up some of this love. But we're going to talk a lot more, I think, about Puerto Rico than Gaithersburg, sorry. Because, you know, there are multiple aspects of home, which I think you explore very well here in this book. But what I would love to start with is if you could give us just a short description, you know, your take on what the book is about. I know what, you know, is written on the back, and I know what, you know, but how do you describe the book?
I need to get better at doing this part. It's really hard to distill 100,000 words into like a couple of succinct sentences. But this book is about 3 generations of Puerto Rican women, or 3 generations of women in a Puerto Rican family, I should say, and how their identity shifts across the generations, how they misunderstand each other and find their way home to each other despite that misunderstanding. Those are the sort of themes of the book. The plot is that in the first chapter, the granddaughter of this family has a terrible accident, and we don't know if she's going to survive or not. And her grandmother and mother are both racing to her hospital bedside in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and they can't get to her because there's a storm. And so as they are trying to get to Daisy's bedside, their sort of lives and memories unfold in the backstory, and we learn how it is that they arrived at this moment. I think I'm getting better at that, actually. That was better than I did a few days ago, so.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. That's what I remember from reading.
Okay.
So now that you've set it up like that, can you read a little bit for us from the first chapter?
Yes. So I'm going to read from, there are, you know, the book follows the 3 protagonists. The grandmother character is Rafaela. She's based on my grandmother, Maria. The middle generation character is Ruth, who's based on my father. And then the granddaughter character is Daisy. Daisy has just moved back to Puerto Rico to try to reconvene with her Puerto Rican roots, and she has a terrible accident. So this is the end of the first Daisy chapter. In the quickening wind, she kept her knees slightly bent to absorb the bumps as she flew down Calle Jose Marti and turned left up the hill, where she could see a fog of drizzly light hanging above Condado. At the highway intersection, she dismounted so she could walk across. Tourists often whizzed past her at this corner, while she lingered at the crosswalk, but Daisy knew that being brave and being foolhardy were not the same thing. She always waited for the light. The cat appeared as if by magic then, as if he were himself only a trick of light. He was black and gleaming, and only his yellow eyes were visible enough to assert that he was not imaginary in the darkness, which was earlier and more oppressive because of the arriving storm. The traffic lights were kicking up their colors in the wind, but the intersection beneath was slow, quiet. Very few cars remained out on the roads now. All the non-idiots were safe at home, filling their bathtubs with water and charging their devices. A single car eased through the intersection toward her, and Daisy began to fear for the cat. "Here, kitty," she said softly. He paused on 3 legs to look up at her, unwilling to advance any farther. "No, don't stop," she said, her voice mounting in volume. "Come out of the road." The cat twitched a whisker. "Ven, gatito," she tried, realizing that perhaps the cat didn't speak English. Still, he did not move, and Daisy recognized that he was like her, a worrier out flitting around in the hot night pretending to have his shit together. She took 2 steps back, and the cat padded forward like it was a waltz. Just as the car slid past him, he leaped to the curb and dashed past Daisy through a nearby fence. As his tail was swallowed up by the hedge on the other side, it seemed to suck the last impression of daylight with it. When Daisy turned back around, the corner appeared even darker than before. Full night had fallen in the time it had taken to turn her head. She stepped down from the curb then, holding the handlebars of the scooter in both hands, trusting and adjusting as her headlight lit the pavement below. Her body knew something was about to happen before her brain did. There was no sound except wind, no sensory information to serve as a warning. Yet still, Daisy's body flexed with a feeling of tremendous foreboding. It appeared in her peripheral vision as a growing shape, a swift and hungry shadow, impossible to comprehend, black and silent as it hurtled toward her through the darkness, a car with its headlights off, noiseless and fast. But Daisy was visible in her light-colored clothing, her scooter, the light, the reflective tape. She wasn't even fully onto the road yet, so it made no sense that the car would reach her here just off the curb, that it seemed to be accelerating toward her. She could not move. Like a nightmare, she was stuck. And though it happened almost instantly, the moment seemed to stretch into an hour, a year. Daisy watched herself from above, unmoving, frozen in panic. She willed herself to flee, but there was no movement at all. Only a scream as she released her grip on the handlebars, and her arms flew uselessly up in front of her face, as if they could stop the car from coming. Terror does not wear the conventional costume. It's not a monster with fangs and claws that swoops in screeching with blood on its breath. True terror is walking into a room where you've lived alone for 40 years and finding that your chair is not precisely where you left it. Terror is the smallest detail, just slightly askew. A car where a car should not be. Just before impact, Daisy understood that some people are not as philosophical as they expect to be about death. They experience no profound review of their life's most exceptional moments, no series of flashing images, no survey of love or regrets. Sometimes, in the instant just before the crash, the only thought that appears in the mind is this one: "Oh God, I'm about to die."
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely. That's such a strong opening for any book. And, especially to have a young woman who is, like on the brink and you don't know what's going to happen to her,
Yeah.
as you read on. But you mentioned your father and your grandmother
Yes.
as people who characters were based on.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for the book itself?
Yes. So, I think in the aftermath of publishing American Dirt, you may have heard there was a little controversy around that book. And a lot of the controversy was about my identity as a Latina woman. I did a lot of soul searching in the years after that book was published, and I was sort of asking myself, I think, the question, am I doing it wrong? Is there something artificial about the way that I am experiencing my identity? Or why are people so mad about this? I really wanted to understand. And spoiler alert, by the way, no, I'm not doing it wrong. But it took me a minute to get there. Thank you. But you know, I spent a long time reflecting on those questions and trying to figure out how I got here to this moment in my life where my ethnicity was being adjudicated on Twitter. And there were many, many factors that led into that reality. But thinking about it in terms of my life experiences, I tell this story. There's a story in the book where the older brother, Benny, has a hard time learning English, so the parents forbid the kids from speaking Spanish at home, which was our story. My brother, Tom, who's here somewhere, had he's he's pretending that it's not him, but we all see you over there, Tom. I was born in Spain. My sister and I were both born in Spain. Our father was Puerto Rican, so my parents thought, how great we can have Spanish-speaking bilingual kids. So we spoke Spanish when we were little, and then we moved to California. My dad was in the Navy. We moved to California, and my brother got enrolled in school in California. He had a really hard time learning English. And so my dad, after like chewing out the teacher whose name was Mrs. Garcia and who called my brother stupid because he couldn't speak English, my dad took him out of that school, and then he came home and he said, we can't have any more Spanish at home. And so as a result of that, we lost our language. And I've spent the last 10 or 12 years of my life trying to get it back. And I do speak Spanish now. It's not great, but I can have a conversation. And I love speaking Spanish. I'm really proud of it. So 40 years after that experience, to find myself on a national stage trying to answer to people who were ridiculing my broken Spanish led me into this story, because I thought, how do both of those experiences exist in the same lifetime? How did I get from there, being shamed for that, to here where I'm being shamed for the opposite? How did I travel across that distance? Which led me to start thinking about my father and his experiences growing up back and forth. He was born in Jefferson City, Missouri, made his first trip to Puerto Rico when he was 3 months old. His mother was born and raised in San Juan, but mostly raised her kids in Missouri. And they had a rough childhood, not least of all because of the pervasive prejudice and racism that they faced in Missouri. And so, you know, all my grandmother wanted was for her kids to pass. Mm-hmm. So she raised 8 kids in a hostile environment. And so that was the germ of this story, was trying to trace her experiences, the way she responded emotionally to those experiences, and then obviously fictionalize them. No one would want to read a novel about my actual grandmother because she was mean. And Rafaela is not mean. She's very charming. So, you know, it's not a true story, but the circumstances of Rafaela's life in the book are exactly the circumstances of my grandmother's life in Puerto Rico.
Right. Okay. So I guess in some ways then you would say that this book is in conversation with your previous book.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I would say so. It's
Right.
not about what happened to me. But definitely, I don't know if I would have... Definitely it was the aftermath of American Dirt that led me into the ideas that produced this book.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And how difficult was it to write?
Very difficult. Is this okay?
Yeah.
It was nope. Okay, it's coming and going. I think we're good. Okay, we're good. No, it was very difficult. It took me over a year to even think about writing again after American Dirt. I don't know if you guys remember what else happened in 2020.
Well,
This is a great year. You know, a lot of people said to me, well, that must have been sort of a blessing. My book tour was canceled because of threats of violence against me in January of 2020. And then, like, 2 months later, the whole world shut down. And people were like, well, it would have been canceled anyway that must have been sort of a relief. Everybody had to retreat, and I was like, no, everyone had nothing better to do than be mean on Twitter all year. So it went on and on and on. So yeah, it took me a long time, and I had to do a lot of soul searching to ask myself whether or not I wanted to write another book, because if you're doing it right, being a novelist requires vulnerability. And when you are vulnerable in the ways that I made myself vulnerable when I was writing American Dirt, which is full of my own grief, and then that vulnerability gets swept up in the kind of hatred that I endured, it's hard to know whether you want to put yourself through that again. I was like, I have a good life. Like, I have a happy family. I'm good. Maybe I don't want to do this again. But ultimately, like, I don't know how to not write. And writing fiction is the way that I make sense of the world, including the bad things that happen to me. And so I found myself writing this book.
Okay, yeah, and I think that the whole idea of identity, like you searching for your identity, comes across so fully and so well in this book, because I think each character is doing pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
And so there's a section that I actually really loved and would like you to read. It's on my version of 125.
Okay, this is a little shorter, so. And anyway, even though, so I wonder if I need to set this up a little bit. So Rafaela is the grandmother character, and my grandmother was born into a very well-to-do family in Puerto Rico. And when she was a teenager, her father lost everything, and she was shipped out to Trinidad to get a job on a naval base, and sort of never recovered from that. She was like angry for the rest of her life, and could not abide the way people treated her like a Puerto Rican in this country. She kind of walked around saying, like, don't you know who I am, for the rest of her life. This moment in the book is happening when the character Rafaela, whose father has just lost everything and she's being shipped out to Trinidad to get a job, is reflecting on her parents' marriage and the boy that she's leaving behind, who is someone she really loves, but up to this moment in her life was never considered a suitable suitor for her. So he was someone that she never really considered. But now in this new moment, she's thinking about it in a different way. And anyway, even though it was never explicitly spoken aloud, Rafaela had always understood, even before Trinidad, that it was fine for a man, like Papa Mio, to choose anyone he wanted, like Mamma Mia, those are her parents, as his spouse, no matter what his beloved looked like, or where she came from, or who her parents were. Men from certain bloodlines could do as they liked, and any attendant scandal for the man would be swift and light and quickly forgotten. The same was not true for Mamma Mia, nor would it be true for Rafaela. She knew it was different for women because, although no one ever said so, she had breathed and consumed and absorbed it since infancy. Falling in love with a boy like Candido would ruin her. And despite the new circumstances of her life, she was not yet willing to concede that she might in fact already be ruined. It had not yet occurred to Rafaela that ruin and liberty were the same word. So, the quavering of her heart notwithstanding, the possibility of Candido did not exist, and the ache that remained in the shadow he cast there only served to confound her.
Yeah, I love that idea, that ruin and liberty,
Thank you.
That ruin and liberty are the same thing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I was reflecting on my grandmother's life in terms of how her experiences affected my father, how her experiences affected enormously his psychology growing up. it was the first time that I really felt empathy for my grandmother when I was writing this book, because she was not a nice woman. She was a terrible mother. Something I don't want to get into very deeply because it's not my business. But my dad had a very unhappy childhood, and all 7 of his siblings had a very unhappy childhood. And so we didn't grow up with a lot of empathy for Grandma. But when I was writing this book and I started to wonder, like, about the circumstances, the real circumstances of Maria's life, my grandmother's life, for the first time I was like, no wonder she was mad. There's another story in the book. I hope I don't spoil it. I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but my grandfather joined a country club in St. Louis because my grandmother could not make friends. No one wanted anything to do with her. And so my grandfather was like, I know, we'll join a country club and you'll have built-in friends. So he joined the country club, and then he took my grandmother and their children to the country club, and they showed up, and the country club people were like, oh, this is not what we had in mind, you know? So Maria was denied a locker in the women's locker room. They gave her a locker, I think, in the staff room instead. And they kept going. Like, they kept going back to that country club. And when I think about that now, I'm like, I would have been so mad. I would have been bitter and angry and a terrible mother also. So I started to feel empathy, deep empathy for her when I was hearing these stories. It doesn't excuse the way that she behaved as a mother, but it makes me understand her. So when I was writing this book, I started to consider the character of Rafaela. What if she had had just a few different forks in the road than the ones that my grandmother had afforded to her? Mm-hmm. What if she had had contraception, even? What if she didn't have 8 kids? What if she had enough money to be able to have some independence? And I think she spent the rest of her life trying to claw her way back into the social status that she felt was her birthright, that everyone in this country absolutely refused to acknowledge. And she never learned that ruin and liberty are the same word. She never learned that maybe if she sort of embraced the freedom of her new position, she might find happiness. And I wish that for her. Right. So one great joy of writing this book was that I felt like I was able to give her a do-over in the character of Rafaela.
Right. Yeah, that's that's touching. And, you know, perhaps if she had been around to read this book, she would probably feel that way. At the very least, seeing her story and her experience being told. Because so much of that experience, the immigrant experience, I think is glossed over. There's some aspects of it that, you know, it is always talked about. But the very real part of leaving your family behind, of leaving your culture, leaving your entire life. And in her case, she left her life. So, you know, I certainly can understand it, and I can see exactly how that affected her. And also, she had not had that experience in Puerto Rico because of bloodlines, which is what I want you to talk about a little bit, because, you know, growing up, I think there's a section, too, where not just with Candido, but where they're getting dressed to go to a holiday party. And so can you talk a little bit about that setup for the you know, like readers who either have not read the book or who will be reading it, you know, like what her life really was like in Puerto Rico, and also a little bit more of what it became in the
Yes.
US.
So I mean, to be clear, when I say my grandmother was from a wealthy family, well-to-do, they had live-in servants. It was that kind of wealthy. It was like I can't even fathom the life that they had. And my mom will tell you that she, like, Maria's, when she was an old woman, she talked about it constantly. And I think that was her effort to force people to reckon with who she was, because no one would acknowledge her. And of course, it just came off as arrogant and like superficial. But I think what she was really saying was like, see me, see who I am. I'm not who you think I am. So the scene in the book that you reference is this moment when Rafaela Mamma Mia. So my great-grandparents, my dad's grandparents were called Mamma Mia and Papa Mio. That's what we called them. And their kids called them that, their grandkids called them, and their great-grandkids. And Mamma Mia lived to be 101 years old. So I knew her well into my childhood. She was a character as well. But in the fictional Mamma Mia in the book is getting ready for a very glamorous night at La Fortaleza it's like the White House of Puerto Rico. They've been invited to a really glamorous holiday party, and they're leaving the girls at home. And the two sisters, Rafaela and her sister Dolores wants no part of this. She's like, I want to stay home, and I want to eat some, delicious food, and I want to read my books. But Rafaela thinks of herself as very glamorous already at like 7 years old, and she's like, I want to go to La Fortaleza and be in the party, right? So as Mamma Mia is reflecting on her daughters in this moment, we learn that even in Puerto Rico, identity is not unassailable. These problems go way, 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 way back. And even when you think that someone's identity is simple and fixed, it's not so. Mamma Mia is Puerto Rican, with everything that means, which is, she is ethnically Puerto Rican. Papa Mio was a blue blood. So he traced his lineage very proudly back to Europe. So his family tree was mostly Spanish. So what the girls don't understand is that when Mamma Mia goes into these rooms, she is very much the outsider, even though she is Puerto Rican, because she is a jibara. She is a woman of color. And she's not welcome in these rooms, but she is so charming and she is such a force of nature that people accidentally fall in love with her. But she determines that she wants to protect her children from absorbing as much of this as possible. And then, of course, a few years later, they lose their fortune anyway and everything changes.
Right. Yeah, and then the children get here,
Yes.
to St. Louis, and it's a very, very different experience.
Yes.
So, like when I read that scene, the golf club scene,
Yeah.
I was actually absolutely surprised
Yeah.
that they stayed.
I know.
And-
Well, I think we're probably of the same generation, right?
Right.
And when I learned this from my two aunts who shared the story with me, I was like outraged on Maria's behalf, and I was like, why did they stay? I wouldn't have stood for it. And then immediately I recognized my hypocrisy. Of course I would have stood for it. It was 1950.
Right.
Like, what choice did she have? She wanted her kids to have some glimpse of the same kind of privilege that she grew up with. And so she was willing to endure that indignity to get her kids into that country club. But she was not happy about it, and she paid for that with this psychic cost.
Right. And she continues it because there is another section which I actually would like you to read. That's on page 149.
Yes.
Because I think there is so much actual erasure.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so this is from the daughter, Ruth. It's from Ruth's perspective. This is Ruth as a college student looking back, reflecting on her childhood in St. Louis. In St. Louis, when people bothered to take up the question of her ethnicity at all, they called her Mexican. In the same way they called the Vietnamese boy, 2 Korean girls, and 1 Chinese-American teacher in their school district all Chinese. Even the ones who cared, who knew they weren't supposed to say Oriental anymore, hadn't quite made it to Asian yet. They were doing their best, Ruth thought, because that was what she wanted to believe. She seldom bothered to correct them. All throughout her childhood in the Midwest, she had ingested the reality that the only thing that mattered about her appearance was the fact that she was almost, but not quite, white. Even the forms she filled out when she was applying to Wodesley and other colleges gave her extremely limited options as far as those check boxes were concerned. She'd had to choose one: white, black or Negro, Indian, Asian, other. Ruth had checked other, and her mother, leaning over her shoulder at the kitchen table, had literally smacked the pencil out of her hand. "What are you doing?" the mama had asked. Ruth bent down to retrieve the pencil from the floor. Just filling out the forms? I mean, what are you doing checking other? Ruth had been unable to formulate a sensible response. "You are white," Mama said. "You check white." Mama tapped her finger impatiently on the appropriate box in case Ruth could not find it without her help. Ruth flipped her pencil around and started erasing her other check mark, but then ventured a small opinion in her mother's direction. "You know, there may be scholarships available for—" "White," Mama interrupted. And so Ruth had checked white, but she felt a kind of slithering across her skin when she did it.
And so I think there you see exactly what you were just talking about, how much she wanted her children to experience the privilege that she experienced growing up. But what are the real consequences long term for Ruth in terms of, with this erasure of her heritage and who she is?
Well, this was the really interesting. I thought Ruth was a very interesting character for me to write because generationally I occupy the position of Daisy in the book. But Ruth was the character who had most of my experiences. And I can say that from my point of view, like I grew up here in Gaithersburg in Montgomery County. I grew up in Quail Valley. Anyone here from Quail Valley in the 80s? Okay. You guys remember what it was like. It was not only diverse, it was integrated. I did not know that that was an unusual childhood. I had a childhood that felt, to me, post-racial. And I actually had an event last night in Georgetown, and a lot of my friends from Gaithersburg High School came there, and it was amazing. We had so much fun, and we talked about all of this, and we talk about it every time we get together, because we all had a similar experience. Whatever our races are, we all had this feeling growing up that we were past it, and then we all went to college and went out in the world, and we were like, holy racism, Batman. It is crazy out there. It was, I only went to Baltimore. I went to Towson, and I was like, what is happening? So I had this experience that is a scene in the book where Ruth goes to college, and she goes into the dining hall, and she's like, she looks around, and it's totally self-segregated. That was how Towson was when I went to school there. I don't know if it's still like that. But like the main dining hall was where all the white kids sat. And then in all the peripheral rooms, the smaller rooms around the outside, one room was like for Latino kids, another one was for African American kids, another one was for Asian kids. And I walked into that room for the first time and I was like, where do I sit? I did not want to be in that white room. I was not comfortable there. I had never been in a room with only white people. And I did not feel that I belonged there. And that was the first, but I also was aware that I couldn't like waltz into one of the other rooms without an invite, right? So it was the first time in my life that I started to contend with the fact that the way I felt and experienced my identity was different from the way other people perceived me. And of course that all came to a head 30 years later with American Dirt. But I've been grappling with it ever since then. And I think it's really interesting. I think it makes for really interesting, fertile ground for a novel, for a character like Ruth, who has the experience I described before with my brother and I being forbidden from speaking Spanish. The only reason Kathy, my sister, was not involved in that story is because she was a baby at the time. But we did have these experiences of feeling erased in some ways. And my grandmother, I think, felt that she had been successful in raising white children. But then she didn't understand that there would be a cost to pay at the other end of that, not only for my dad and his siblings who grew up with a lot of shame about ingesting a lot of shame about who they were. They were told not to tell anyone you're Puerto Rican. Say Spanish instead. And you know, they never talked about it. My dad never talked about it. And then of course we came along and we were like so proud of our Puerto Rican roots. And we're like, we're Puerto Rican. And our parents were like, are you? Sure. So I love the interplay between the generations in this book because I think that is such an important part of the way identity morphs and the ways we don't understand each other when we talk about it. Like, I will tell you, I don't think I could have written this book when my dad was alive because I think he would have been like, in his life, he never uttered the word identity, not once. I think he would have been like, I roll, you know? Right. But I will say one last thing. We had a Zoom family book club last Monday with all my dad's siblings and his cousins, some of whom grew up in Puerto Rico. And I was worried because I felt like my dad was in the room. And that was the most affirming experience because they validated that what I imagined my father's feelings were in those moments were the feelings that they had. And that was a really good feeling for me.
Great. I have... I'm going to open it up to questions, but I have one last question for you because I think there is something circular about it because Benny goes back to Puerto Rico. Yes. And then Daisy goes back to Puerto Rico. So what does that mean to you, both either personally and also in the book itself?
Well, I have gone back. My poor kids who are here, my beautiful daughters who are here in the front row, stand up, girls. I'm going to embarrass you. Turn around and show everybody how pretty you are. So my beautiful daughters and my beautiful husband, who's also here, but I won't make him stand up because he'll divorce me. He's from Ireland, and so my kids are more than half Irish. He's from Ireland. You'll see there's a joke in the book. From there and from there are not the same thing. He is from Ireland. So his parents still live there. His siblings still live there. All of my kids' cousins on that side of the family live there. And so people have asked me, you know, how do your daughters identify? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I can tell you this. Young people do not have the same hang-ups about telling you who they are, and they will also tell you who you are, you know, which I think is a great thing in some ways. My daughters will forge their own path with their identity, but I have accidentally confused the hell out of them because I have returned very strongly to my Puerto Rican roots, and I have established Puerto Rican customs in our family that I did not grow up with. So I cook Puerto Rican food. I always say my kids are not quite fluent in Spanish, but they are fluent in Bad Bunny. They know every single Latino pop song that comes because that's all we listen to in the house. So I think I wanted to acknowledge, and I think it's very common that the third generation kids from all kinds of cultures feel a longing to return to the culture. And it's a tragedy when they find that the roots are broken. But there's also something really beautiful in trying to repair what's broken and heal what was lost. So that's what I'm trying to do with my family.
Okay, great. Yeah. If there are any questions, I know there's a mic floating around. So if you either raise your hand or stand up.
Come on, guys, don't be shy.
Oh, here's one.
I read American Dirt. I have not read your new book, but I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
And I'll say that the negative controversy also inspired a lot of people to read it, to find out. We had it in our book club, and the discussion was really intriguing. I'll say everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And then just like you shared at Towson, there were people, I think on NPR, that had a story about how Montgomery County is the most diverse county in the United States, possibly in the world.
Yeah.
But but we all have different experiences. With that diversity, some people know their neighbors on a very deep level as friends, and others barely know them.
Yeah.
So there's that, boundaries, I think, would be the word I'm looking for, where you may choose them on your own, or you feel others pick them, like you were describing in the Towson. So my question is, for you, how have you changed as an author? I think you've talked about it a little bit here, but as a mom, wife, and as a citizen of Gaithersburg, how have you changed as a result of the controversy?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm hella strong, but I think, I'm lucky that this was not my first rodeo. I've had a lot of trauma in my life. There's a lot of people here who know me, and a lot of people who don't know me but maybe have read my memoir. My family endured a double homicide when I was 16. And that is the story that my memoir is about, A Rip in Heaven. And that wasn't the last one, So in some ways, I feel like I was well positioned to be the writer who had to endure that controversy because I know how to survive hard things. And it was hard. But I will say I remain so proud of that book and the work that it has done in the world, opening people's hearts and minds to the humanitarian crisis at our southern border, which is a stain on our national conscience. And that book exists in the world to open people's eyes. And thank you. So I will just say that if the price of getting it out into the world was that I had to walk through some tremendous discomfort, it was worth paying that price.
Hi. Can you hear? I have another understanding of why maybe the third generation or second generation is really interested in looking back. And that, my family, I'm Jewish, so my grandparents all came from Russia. And when all of them, and I think this is kind of generational, when all of them came, all they wanted to do was be American.
Yeah.
So they did not talk about what their experiences were like. So consequently, I know nothing about that whole amazing experience of coming across the world and establishing a new life. Yeah. And what I understand is that when it was sparked in my generation of looking back was the movie Roots in the 70s, when all of a sudden everyone became aware that you had a whole history.
Yeah, and it's a trauma. So a lot of times the people who endure that first generation, it's hard for them to talk about, and the kids are oblivious. And then by the time we start asking questions, it's maybe too late.
Right, I don't have anyone to ask.
Right.
And I will just mention, I was in Puerto Rico for my brother-in-law who's Israeli. His son married a Puerto Rican woman.
Lucky guy.
And so I was at an Israeli-Puerto Rican wedding in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
And that was the best.
I bet. That sounds amazing. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rita Montoya. I'm from the Montgomery County Public Schools Board of Education.
Oh, awesome.
So I wanted to thank you. It's always wonderful to see our alums doing amazing things and most importantly coming back to our community to share that with all of us.
Always.
As a Latina, I resonate with so much of what's in your book. And so I was wondering if you thought that some of this was also a protective factor. I know in my own family, my grandparents did not teach their children, my father and mother on both sides, Spanish because kids were getting hit at school when they were speaking Spanish.
Wow.
And so they wanted to protect them. Now, in hindsight, we all wish that was not the case because we've had to learn Spanish at school and things like that.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a protective factor for them.
Yeah.
But it's also that erasure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good comment. And it's not the way that I necessarily interpreted it in my childhood. But I think you're right that is a reality for many people. And it is such a comfort to me to see that in younger generations, people who are, especially in the Latino community, I don't know so much in other cultures, but there seems to be a real pride in the younger generations retaining their language. And so kids are not being, silenced out of their native language anymore the way they were in the 70s and 80s when my brother and I had that experience, at least not as frequently. And that gives me you know, as slippery as this moment we're experiencing in the culture is so fraught and uncomfortable, and sometimes the pendulum goes too far and things are way out of control. But I will say that maybe, again, this could be part of it is the cost of progress. And I think the fact that young kids are retaining their language, their native language with pride, is a sign of progress. Yes. Do we have the, are we at time? Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was a really lovely conversation.
Donna.
And